So I've been shooting a lot of videos recently with a really wide lens. If you saw our latest video on the FX3, I used the 12 to 24 G Master lens for that, and I absolutely loved the images you could get with it, especially in a city like New York. So I thought it might be an interesting video to make, breaking down my favorite, or sort of the higher end of the Sony options. So what we have today is the 12 to 24 G Master, the 16 to 35 G Master, and the 14 prime G Master lenses. So if you're in the market for a great Sony G Master lens and you want to pick an ultra wide to wide angle option and you're not sure between which three to pick, I think this will be a great video for you. We're in Astoria, Queens, and we're going to get some real world footage, break down some of the pros and cons of each lens, some of the quirks of each, and what makes each individual lens right for which user. So let's get right into it. Let's first break down the build of these three lenses, as aside from the differing focal lengths, it will probably be one of the bigger determining factors that will help you decide if you'd like to invest in one of these lenses. Starting with the 14mm f1.8, this weather-sealed lens is significantly more compact and lightweight than its ultra-wide counterparts. With dimensions at 99.8mm tall by 83mm wide and a weight of 16.3 ounces, the lens is supremely easy to carry around and use on even lower budget gimbals that often struggle with heavier camera setups. It also comes equipped with a rear filter slot, 9 aperture blades, an aperture control ring, and a D-click for aperture, and an AF to MF switch on the lens, as well as a custom control button on the lens itself, giving it a nice utility for the price point. The focus ring is towards the front of the lens, with the aperture ring on the back, and most noticeably, has a lens hood permanently fixed, which is something I'll touch on more later. Onto the 16 to 35mm f2.8, we get another weathered sealed lens that's going to come with a heavier build at 24 ounces and a body the size at 121.6mm tall by 88.5mm wide. The lens does have 11 aperture blades as opposed to the 9 blades on the 14 and 12 to 24mm lenses, and the 16 to 35mm has an 82mm filter thread, allowing for filter attachments, which again differs from the other two lenses. On the body is an AF to MF switch and a custom control button, along with a front focus ring, and it does lack that aperture ring that the 14mm does have. Lastly, probably the most technically challenging lens to pull off on this list is the 12 to 24mm f2.8. It's extremely impressive that Sony was able to design a lens that doubles its minimum focal length and stays at f2.8 throughout the zoom range. In turn, the lens is the heaviest of the three, weighing 847 grams or 30 ounces and measuring at 137mm tall by 97.6mm wide. It's similar to the 14mm with 9 aperture blades and also has a fixed lens hood. It does have a custom control button and a front of the lens focus, and is nicely weather sealed like the other three. So we want to set up the camera to shoot some long exposure shots. So we have a 10-stop ND filter on the 16 to 35mm lens, and it's kind of interesting to point out that one of the quirks with the 14 and the 12 to 24mm lenses are that you can't just use your regular, if you have a screw-on filter or a matte box like that, you're not going to be able to use it with the 14 and the 12 to 24 because it's kind of got that like bubble lens action going on. So you have to figure out a different way to put a filter on. For those of you who have already invested a lot of money, whether it's into a Black Pro mist filter or your ND filters, it's going to work great on a 16 to 35 if you have that 82mm filter size, but it's going to be a little more tricky on the 14 and 12 to 24. So it's just something to keep in thought if you're someone who's already invested a good amount of money into filters, if you want to keep that in mind when making a purchase for one of these lenses.
Out in Astoria, we tested the autofocus on all three lenses, including a quick test at the widest and closest focal lengths on the two zoom lenses. And to no surprise, we were extremely impressed with all three. Sony's autofocus system is known to be very quick, and in my opinion, it's really hard to give any one lens the lead in this department. All three lenses were fantastic in the autofocus department, with very minimum shifting and doing a fantastic job keeping the subject in focus when moving closer and further to camera. If autofocus is something that's important to you, all three lenses are going to be great options here, to no surprise really. Next, we shot both photo and video to show off each lens's image quality, and to show how different the compositions look at each focal length. We set up a few of the same shots and repeated them with each lens to show the differences between all three. In my opinion, it was pretty shocking how wide that 12mm was, even when compared to these other two ultra-wide lenses. And even though there's warping as to be expected, you do have the option to still shoot at a fast f2.8 at 24mm, which produced really solid sharpness around the edges of the image. So yes, this lens is a hefty $3,000, but you get something I think that doesn't really exist in any other lens for Sony E-mount systems. As for the 16 to 35mm, I love the option of adding filters onto the lens, allowing us to get some long exposure shots. It performs well at 16mm, giving a nice wide look that is perhaps a bit more subtle than the 14 and 12mm options. More notably, you can still shoot at f2.8 at 35mm. Lastly, the 14mm may be the least versatile lens on the list, but is also the lightest and least expensive lens in this group. Having shot multiple videos with this lens, the lightweight and ultra wide angle make it so easy to shoot handheld because you get a great perspective and can get really close to your subject and get minimum camera shake because of how wide the lens is. Also, being able to stop down to f1.8 gives you an even more low light capable lens than the other two. To conclude things, which of these lenses is right for you to invest in? If you know you want an ultra wide lens and you already have a 24 to 70mm that you can rely on, then I think the 14mm is the right choice for you, because you're not going to need the extra focal lengths that come with the 12 to 24mm or the 16 to 35mm lens, and you still get a really great ultra wide millimeter lens with the 14. Not to mention, you also get the aperture ring on the 14. It's more lightweight, it's more inexpensive, and it's way more compact and easy to use than the 12 to 24 and the 16 to 35mm. And lastly, it has an aperture of 1.8, so you can really use it for astrophotography or low light photography a little more than you can get with your other two options. Now, if you want an ultra wide lens that's really going to give you a unique look with a super ultra wide image, the 12 to 24 is the right choice for you. Being able to go down to 12 really has an even more unique image than the 14 or 16. In the photos and videos, you can really tell the difference between how truly wide that 12mm is. Not to mention, you can still go up to 24mm and get a really nice image out of that focal length as well, and stay at f2.8, which is really, really unique for any E-mount lens. I really haven't seen one that has the versatility of the 12 to 24. And lastly, if you want an ultra wide lens that's going to be a little more of a subtle look than the 14 and 12mm, the 16 to 35mm f2.8 is the right option for you. Not only does it go to a nice wide angle at 16mm, but it allows you to zoom all the way in to 35mm without sacrificing any of your fast aperture, being able to stop down to f2.8 at 35mm. This makes this lens a viable portrait lens as well as a wide angle lens, which is something really unique to have in the lens. Not to mention the fact that unlike the other two lenses, you can still attach your variable ND filters, your Pro Mist filters, any attachments or filters that you have already invested in as part of your setup. This makes the lens even more valuable to think about when compared to the other two. It also sits right between the other two in terms of price and weight. Ultimately, all three of these lenses are going to give you great value and great images
when you purchase them. It's just going to come down to your own specific preferences and needs for your projects moving forward. That's going to do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. It really helps out. Thanks. Have a good day.